Good evening, everybody. Glad that you're joining us on this April 25th of 2017. My name is Felix, aka the Titanium Vulture, and I have a guest with me. He's a real good friend of mine, my brother in arms, John, aka Ghostdog. Say what's up to everybody, man.
Hey, what's going on?
Yo, so here's the deal. We are going to talk about some of the situations that are going on in Syria right now. And I just want to give a little background on my man real quick. So, Ghost Dog and I have been friends for, probably at least 10 years now, a little more than that. We met in college. And Ghost Dog is a veteran of Operation Enduring Freedom. And John, you're welcome to cut in and correct me if I get any of this stuff wrong. But during the time of the operation that happened in the Middle East, John spent some time out there being deployed out there in Iraq. I have some experience in the military as well, but not during that specific time. So John brings in a lot of experience. So first thing I want you to do, John, is just talk, kind of just give me a quick summary of your experience over there, out there downrange, working out there as a Marine.
I jumped over a lot of different places. The biggest one, obviously, is Iraq. I've never been to Afghanistan. I know people that have served over there. And I've been all over the surrounding areas. I've been to Jordan. I've been to Israel. A lot of areas around there. So it's just a volatile place, and things are very different over there. The culture's different. It's just people, are so quick to get emotional about, what people should and shouldn't do, and the conflicting ideas on how we should respond. And you have people that think we should not be America's police and all that kind of stuff. But
You mean world police, right?
yeah, I that's what I
Yeah,
meant.
I understand.
World police. But it's an ongoing issue. The Middle East, and it's not going to be solved anytime soon. And there's been a lot happening. So.
So of course, there's been recent stories coming out, and we'll get into that more as we go along here. But I just want to talk to everybody, let everybody know out there that you're dealing with someone that has a good amount of experience on the subject, and he has the inside track of a lot of the things that are going on there. Being that he keeps in touch with a lot of people who have served, and I would imagine continue to serve in some shape, form, or fashion. The big concern right now going on at this time that we're hearing about is the issues going on over in Syria, and I'm just going to kind of run a couple of statistics your way, and this is actually going to be from Al Jazeera's page, and it's basically a summary about some of the things that are happening over there. So according to Al Jazeera, and I haven't confirmed any of this, I'm just basically trying to just get a couple things going so we could talk about some things. This conflict's been going on for about 7 years. It kicked off during the time of the Arab Spring, where there was a lot of protests and lots of regime changes, a lot of just big changes going on in the Middle East region. And at this point, the body count that I'm looking at right now, according to Al Jazeera, is close to 500,000 people. Syrian people that have been killed in the fighting, and more than 1 million injured, and a lot more people who have been displaced. And we just had this operation come down recently, which everybody's talking about the mother of all bombs. Which, yeah, it's a big piece of munitions, man. But compared to a nuke, it's really cheesecake in my opinion. So if that's what we're dropping on out there, and as if that's the as far as we go, then we're not doing that bad in my opinion. We could be doing a lot worse over there. John, what's up with Syria, man? Like, why are we talking about Syria? I mean, we just got wrapped up, hopefully wrapped up in Iraq and Afghanistan, and here we go again. People are starting to get worried about it. Like, yo, what's good, man?
Well, in my minimal research on, this whole Syria thing, that M.O.A.B, that acronym that people keep using, I believe these are Tomahawk missiles, is what people are, call it mother of all bombs.
Tomahawks have been around for a while, haven't they?
Yeah, not sure how long, but they fired something like 60 of these Tomahawk missiles, and you're getting conflicting information, of course, on damage assessment, and then you got people chiming in like, oh, well, they didn't hit the runways, and the thing is, it's like you don't know. They're not going to come out and state every single detail on what the intent was, unless they have to, but, from a strategy standpoint, there could be a lot of reasons why they didn't hit the runway. So, you fire 60 of them and, you hit planes and all this other stuff. And this thing with Russia, I guess, apparently there's a lot of speculation that them giving Russia the heads up, almost like a courtesy, like, look, we want to minimize, casualties or whatever. Like, we don't want, Russian military to be caught up in this stuff. I guess the speculation is that them notifying Russia to kind of back off or fall back or just, hey, this is what we're planning on doing. Supposedly that kind of affected it affected the damage. Like, there supposedly that word got out and Syria got some of that information. Obviously they didn't clean out everything or whatever, but the idea is that they did kind of tip their hand a little bit.
Oh, I see. That's funny because I'm not hearing a whole lot of talk about that on any of the news outlets or like on the radio. Everybody just keeps on focusing on this acronym. And that's interesting that there's actually a lot of different elements to this whole thing, and that's what combat's like, right? There's all these things that are happening, and it's not a very simple matter. And in the case of one thing that's interesting that I've been hearing about was that our current president, Donald Trump, he wasn't necessarily involved in the actual decision to make that strike, and there's word that whoever was the commander at that time went ahead and initiated the operation. John, have you heard anything confirming that? And if so, what do you think? If that's a necessary thing, or should the uniformed commanders should they be getting that final approval from the commander in chief?
That, I don't necessarily, I can't speak one way or another, I shouldn't say one way or another, but from what I have read, this guy that everybody's, tearing apart, this guy, Steve Bannon, supposedly, from what I read, Steve Bannon, he opposed it. He opposed this strike. And Jared Kushner, who is the senior advisor to Trump, I guess overruled him. And at some point, obviously, somebody's got to make a decision. But from what I've read, Bannon did not want them to do it. So that I'm not exactly sure as far as, the decision making, if it ultimately came down to them two, and just Trump getting swayed one way or the other.
Okay, as someone who's worn the uniform, as a warrior, should something like that sounds like a fairly big operation. I mean, people were talking about that it was a fairly big operation, and is it really an issue that whoever is out there in the field making those kinds of decisions, do they have to really take all those things up the chain of command? In other words, like, regardless of what the operation is, should the executive branch, should the president be vetting all these operations?
I would think so. I would think so. I mean, it's a situation where, like I said before, I touched on it briefly, this whole notion of, you get the naysayers and it's like, oh, well, you missed this, you didn't hit this. some of these didn't hit anything at all, and the runway, and they're back in business and all this. But at a certain point, it's what is the intent? Was it really? Is it just a show of force? Just to kind of let you know that we can reach out and touch you, in a sense, as opposed to let's decimate the whole entire area or whatever. And that's a question for people above me that are involved. But it's a wide open issue.
Yeah, it's always again, it always seems to be pretty complex, a lot more than most people realize. All right, well, I appreciate the insight on that particular subject. So let's kind of go more into kind of the big picture. We've been involved with this part of the world for a while. Of course, things really started heating up after the attacks on our country on September 11th, 2001, and there's been a lot of talk and opinions about whether we should be out there or not. I have my opinion about what our involvement should be, but I really wanted to kind of get your feeling on it first. And my question to you is, should we even be out there? And if so, what should be the length of our involvement out there over in the Middle East region?
That's a heavy one. My initial answer would be, like I said, I served in Iraq, and I know people that have been. I've only done one tour in Iraq, and other people that I served with, they did multiple tours, 3-4 tours, and coming back and watching documentaries and reading and trying to understand, where you are in history and what you are doing. And I think that my initial answer would be no ground troops. I don't think you should commit ground troops and have another kind of Iraq situation, whether depending on how you assess it or whatever. But I think ultimately there's so many arguments that can be made for not committing any ground troops, especially in this situation where it's so unstable over there. You have to set what your goals are. You have to always know what the goals are and how are we going to achieve these goals, militarily, whatever. And I would say I have nothing against the bombing, honestly, because Assad, I believe is his name, Bashar al-Assad. This guy's not going anywhere. I'm speaking about the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad. He's not going to step down. He's going to continue doing what he's doing, and he's made that pretty clear. He's not going to go anywhere. And using chemical weapons on your own people, and then turning around and saying, you're not using that, and trying to play all these games, and it's like, at the end of the day, like, there's a lot of people dying in Syria that are it's just a really bad situation, and he needs to go. Are we the ones that need to step in there and do it from a regime change standpoint? Not necessarily. I don't think we should get involved in that. But at the end of the day, if this affects us, as a country, from an ISIL or ISIS or whatever standpoint, then yeah, I think we should, use some kind of military action. But as far as committing tons of ground troops and stuff like that, I would say no.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty good answer right there. You and I are in agreement about the idea of sending ground troops like we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm not going to speak too much on those previous two conflicts that we've had. There's a lot of people that have more knowledge about it than me, but I could just give a viewpoint of someone who's on the outside looking in and who's a concerned citizen. And I in the time that I've worked as a news cameraman, I've done a couple of stories about military veterans. Soldiers, Marines coming back with metal placed in their head because part of their brain got blown out by an IED. Young men who are walking around with not just one but two fake legs, and it's quite fascinating to see the resilience in these men and women. But nobody knows what's going on when these folks get home and all the doors are closed and the cameras are off. And I think PTSD is definitely a thing that we need to keep in mind. I believe the former chief of staff of the Army, and I'm going to kind of go back and forth on this, so just give me a second. Yeah, I'm not sure if he's still vice chief of staff of the United States of the Army, but the gentleman's name is General Pete Chiarelli. And hopefully I didn't screw this name up. He had expressed a huge amount of concern over PTSD, and these are one of the effects of ground warfare, sending our folks to go out there and plant our flag somewhere and say, hey, we're controlling this territory right now, and then they're basically waiting to get attacked, and it's been like that for many years. So with the technology that we have right now between the drones and all our air power, especially our air power, there's a lot that we can do from a distance to provide some assistance for these rebel forces, or at the very least, existing as some kind of check and balance for a leader of a country who is just decimating his own countrymen. This is a civil war. This isn't, one country hopping across the Atlantic Ocean to attack another. So I think this is definitely different than a different situation than Iraq and Afghanistan. My concern with the Middle East has always and will be what the people of that country really, really want. In other words, I always ask myself I ask this question of myself: is it better for us to go in there and force the hand and put our own people in there and try to force democracy or a specific idea of what democracy should be on a people? Or is it going to be better for us to provide assistance wherever we can, support from the rear in the background, and then allow the people of that country to decide their own destiny in regards to that? John, what do you think about that?
I agree. I do agree pretty much with everything that you said. At a certain point, you have to take responsibility for your own country. And, a lot of these places, for better or worse, they're still living like it's 200 years ago. And obviously, there's a lot of situations where that clashes with the rest of the world. It's, with the Iraq situation, trying to make it a democracy when, you have, the big thing over here, everybody these people freak out, about, separation of church and state and all that kind of stuff. Well, over there, they don't know what that is. There really is no separation between church and state, and that's like a whole entire other discussion. But I agree. I agree that at a certain point, I'll give you one related scenario or situation where a lot of this stuff in Syria. It's such a fascinating thing to me, and I wish, as I'm doing this podcast, that I was more knowledgeable. That's definitely going to change if we talk about this again. But the Arab Spring, a lot of things that are happening now in a lot of these countries they can be traced back to Arab Spring. I believe in 2011, a lot of these countries like a lot of things just went haywire, and it was just a chain reaction from one to the other. Long story short, out of the Arab Spring with all these countries and everything, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the only country that ended up becoming democratic out of all these Middle Eastern countries was Tunisia. So Tunisia, they overthrew their president, and I'm kind of condensing a lot of things down, but they wanted this guy out. He left, and Tunisia ended up becoming a democracy. So obviously we live in a democracy, and you would hope that a lot more of these Middle Eastern countries would do that. But, then you'll have people that we don't live like that and we can't and all this and yada, yada, yada. Whole other discussion. But one can only hope that, some of these other countries follow suit. Can we just step in and force them to do that from hundreds and hundreds of years of the way they lived? I don't think so. They have to want it.
Right. I think that's the biggest thing is that they have to want to make that change. And it's really important for us to take that in consideration because this whole idea of us going downrange and just doing all these military operations in other countries, every service member's life is valuable, and I personally would rather see the military use the technology to fight these conflicts and allow our young men and women to just take care of the homeland, be here ready to rock and roll. We could get troops somewhere if we had to place ground troops anywhere. It'd be pretty easy for us to get some people over there fast. We could, you could pack a lot of people inside of a C-17 or what have you, and you could just get them out there. And from my time working alongside the Army and the Marines and the Navy, when the alarm goes, these service members are ready to rock, man. And, we don't have to be out there. I think the idea of just providing support is from the rear with the gear is a better idea for our country. Now, the last topic I want to go over with you, John, is let's just put you in the Oval Office right now. You have President Trump's ear. He asks you, what should I be doing about Syria? What would you say?
That's a tough one. I think, attempts at diplomacy with Bashar al-Assad, President al-Assad, obviously this guy's not going anywhere. And amidst of like everything else that, with Russia, and then you go on these news websites and it's, the Korea stuff and I think if this guy is using chemical weapons, on his own people, there needs to be some kind of action, taken, obviously preferably without committing any ground troops. I believe there is a small amount there, but not, in direct conflict with. I could be misspeaking on this right now, but I believe they're not in like direct conflict. There's like so much stuff going on over there that it'll make your head spin trying to keep track of all these tribes and groups that are fighting for control and rebels and who's where and all this stuff. But I don't know. That's a really that's a broad one.
Yeah, it's a big subject. Maybe we could talk about this stuff for hours, but it sounds like the general theme of what you think is right, and this kind of coincides with me, is let's take advantage of the technology that we have and kind of support where we can. And I don't know, if things get really hot, just send in the SEALs, man.
Yeah, I mean, the technology with the satellites and everything like that, I think, at a certain point, there's going to be a reaction. The April set, I believe it was the missile strike was April 7th. So, there's some kind of response. There's a response to al-Assad, and there's always going to be naysayers. No matter what you do, and I would say this kind of lets him know that we can do a lot of things without sending anybody in there if we needed to. And obviously with the technology and the satellites and drones and everything, like, this could really escalate it if our country wanted it to escalate. We could escalate it fairly quickly. So.
One of the cool things I remember about when I was in the Air Force, one of my assignments was working alongside the B-2. The B-2 can pretty much spend as much time as it needs in the air with some refueling, and just they always train to do operations right from the base over in Missouri, and yeah, so. Things get hot. If we need to bring the heat, man, we could do that. And let's try to get some of these boys and gals home, man. And hopefully we can move on and have some reasonable progress over there in the Middle East. And hopefully it'll be the people of those countries saying, you know what? We do want to have a democracy similar to what's happening here in the United States. We do want a separation of church and state. We do want other things, the freedom to choose our leaders. And if that's not what they want, then yeah, I think we need to just let those people decide their destiny. And I think I'm going to let that be the final word. Yo, Ghost Dog, I appreciate you coming on to talk to me. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll be doing more of these types of videos real soon. And just talking about some more of these important issues. So thanks, everybody, and peace.